listening to the Adventure Party for the first week of December 2020. This week, the party take a look into the strange concoction the Wizards of the Coast has freshly brewed for D&D. The Adventure Party, discussing tabletop and related gaming the Irish way.
Welcome to the party. I'm Savage.
I'm Scarr.
And I'm Sean.
All S's today.
Well, when we three meet, what evils shall we brew? Over what new releases shall we toil and trouble? What have we got for review?
Let me just dig deep into this cauldron. There's all sorts of things in it. I might even say there's everything in this cauldron. We're taking a look at at time of recording, not released in Ireland, but released elsewhere, Tasha's Cauldron of Everything. Which is the second major rules expansion to Dungeons & Dragons, after Xanatar's Guide to Everything in, I want to say, 2017, and the...
Did we review Xanatar's Guide at the time?
I must have reviewed it, or at least pulled it out and had to read through it on air. I think I did. I remember sitting with a pile of D&D books and explaining to someone why Xanatar's was the next main one after the Player's Guide in 2014.
The editor will definitely explain the show notes in link to that classic episode.
So, as Sean had mentioned, this book is the book version of this book has yet to hit people's meaty paws, I believe. Although I've seen YouTubers who have their hands in it.
It's in print in the United States, but not overseas. We count as overseas as far as
the United States goes, yes.
Well, no matter how many times we go to the St. Patrick's Day thing in the White House.
So we're looking primarily at the digital edition. Now, Scarr, you are a bibliophile, I believe, amongst your other war crimes.
Yeah, I have a vendetta against the tree. It murdered my mother at a young age. But I have brought up her battle axe, and I will avenge her.
Right, interesting backstory aside. It's really going to be myself and Sean sort of describing the shape of the elephant to you. And I'd be curious to know what the page count on this book actually is. It's such a hard thing to discern from the kind of internet archive of D&D stuff.
Yeah, isn't the D&D Beyond sort of automatic split everything up into its own?
It does. So if you had like one page in the book and there were maybe 2-3 topics on it, you would get 2-3 pages on D&D Beyond, that kind of thing. Sometimes if one topic splashes over 3 pages, it'll be 1 page on D&D Beyond.
You just keep scrolling till you hit the end of the the end of the page. The whole internet thing, well established at this point. Thank you, Tim Berners-Lee. But it does make feeling the thickness of the thing a little more difficult.
Tim Berners-Lee is definitely my favourite web developer.
There's plenty here, though, isn't there?
There is. It's sort of, and I mean, I've heard people ask. I've heard people ask. They say to me, Sean, but we've already had a player's handbook and Xanatar's Guide to Everything 3 years ago. What could this book possibly add? And that's a fair question, because there isn't really much left to add to 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons. But
subclasses. Lots of subclasses. That's what every book adds, I think.
It's lion's share of the book. Lots of subclasses, which, I mean, is fair. I mean, what they added to old versions of D&D were classes, and I guess we just now make those classes subclasses. I think it really adds, aside from a few DM tools, it really adds 2 main things. It adds a whole lot of flexibility to the system, and it also gives you a nice chunk of inspiration. Which is when I looked at Xanatar's, I say it gave you a whole lot of inspiration and a few nice subclasses, but not a whole lot in the ways of flexibility. But it definitely, I think this book betrays the design thinking of potentially future versions of Dungeons and Dragons, just in some of the approaches that have been taken here.
Right. Where will we start then? How are we going to unpick this knot?
Chapter by chapter seems like a good way to go.
Okay, so chapter 1 are 2/3 of the book. Character options.
Yeah, they didn't skimp.
Yeah, and hold on, let me just quickly double check. Everybody gets something, right?
Everybody gets something, and also a new person is added to the team.
Yeah, now I think almost everybody gets something in Xanatar's, but there's been other books like the Sword Coast Adventurer's Guide that haven't had something for everybody. Some classes are like 2 fingers, mate.
Well, So I would consider Xanatar's and Tasha's to be like major rules expansions.
Yes.
Whereas, so in the term of the Sword Coast Adventurer's Guide, I kind of throw that in with, for example, the Guildmaster's Guide to Ravnica, which is really a setting book for Ravnica. There was a setting book for one of the Critical Role settings recently. Bear with me, I'm going to sort of pull up a list of source books.
Explorer's Guide to Wildemount, I believe.
Explorer's Guide to Wildemount, Mythic Odysseys of Taros, Eberron, Rising from the Last War. So there have been other source books over the years, and all of because Wizards kind of take an approach where every book is something for everyone, there have been in those books new classes. New classes, new rules, new inspiration, new magic items. But really, they sort of get collated again in these more major expansions.
Yeah, and look, I don't think I've had a conversation with anybody about this book that hasn't had to at some point address the fact that there's an awful lot of what has to be regarded as reprint material here. It's tweaked here and there, but in some cases significant tweaks. Some cases, like, they change a word and then they reprint a page, which I have something of a problem with. But I think the estimate is about like 60% of this book has appeared elsewhere.
By elsewhere, do you mean like in the Unearthed Arcana playtest articles, or
no? Some of the subclasses. When I alluded to earlier, the Artificer, which is the first entire class to be added to the 5th Ed rule set, has been printed before in a rules expansion. I think the Eberron book printed it.
It's native to Eberron.
Reprinted almost in full here with a few tweaks and a new subclass. Maybe
2, I think.
Possibly 2 subclasses.
Yeah,
armor which is definitely new.
Yeah, it's this. So the thing I have to say is, it also it because, as you say, it brings together so much stuff. It's great to just have this book you can buy and go, right, I now have lots and lots of different options. And the Artificer wasn't very interesting to me, even in old 3.5 Eberron. And I think this version of the Artificer now is starting to look a lot more spicy.
You know, I felt the same way reading through it last night, because I read through the entry in the Eberron book back when it was published, and it didn't really grab me, and I'm definitely more interested in it now. But there's also, like, it's not just like there multiple class. Every class gets 2 or 3 subclasses. A lot of those were printed in previous books. I'm thinking the Rune Knight Fighter, the Cleric Order Domain, the Wizard Blade Singer. They're all like, so some of them have had a couple of minor tweaks, but they're all from previous books. And a couple of the DM tools as well, also featured in previous books. Again, they've been expanded upon in here and tweaked a little bit, but
I believe the Artificer comes with the playtest subclass that is like Iron Man.
Yes, it
the
does.
Armor, yes, you can play Fantasy Iron Man, and it's cool.
Two flavors of Fantasy Iron Man. They didn't skimp on it.
One new section that appears in all of the class options here that Xanatar didn't have, and I think is hugely important for this book, are the optional class features, and no more so than Ranger, that has had a complete overhaul in terms of base options. And these optional class features can now be plugged into any subclass of the classes, I suppose.
So I've been kind of going through them, and a lot of them are just like a little bit extra. And I'm going. I want to get into the kind of design ethos behind those little bits extra in a minute. But the Ranger has had just whole sections just swapped out, and they're all optional. It's like, oh, you can just, like, the Ranger has Animal Companion, tear that out of your book, slap this in instead, call it a day. And that seems to be just the approach they've taken with a lot of, the Ranger more so than anyone else, but a lot of things that they felt maybe needed to be tightened up now, later in the life cycle of this edition. But I think what a lot of it speaks to, and I was getting, is just adding in flexibility. And I kind of want to start right at the start of character creation when I talk about that, because they've also thrown in some new optional rules for choosing your race, your origin.
Yes, this is the thing. Probably the big headline grabber when this has been previewed was they're changing how you can apply race, background, and mechanically the attributes that are the ability scores and modifiers that you get to. You can now freely assign them, essentially.
Yeah, it's optional. It comes with a big star. Ask your DM, and it's not just. Hang on, I'm looking in the wrong place. It's not just the ability scores, also the languages, the proficiencies, and it also has a little bit at the end that says, "Hey, any notes in the player's handbook about what kind of personality traits your race comes with? Feel free to ignore all that." Which is a trend that you see throughout this book of just putting in print things that I think most DMs would have been happy to do anyway if a player asked them nicely.
Well, I think the thing there is that it's most, experienced DMs who've, gone out the gate and have some, have had their bad stories and their bad habits get out of them by dint of experience, whereas the attempt here would be to try to head some problems off the past by informing a GM. It's as much informing the player that this is an option to them as it is informing a GM that this is something that is worth considering as an option in general. And that's just sort of good advice to keep in your head anyway. Particularly for a game like D&D, where it's not an awful lot of the game is in the characters rather than necessarily the setting or the cosmology. So much as cosmology as it has, D&D is is very player focused these days.
What did you make of the new character origin features, Mick?
This has been a bit of a millstone around D&D's neck for a while. They've come under increasing pressure to, well, first of all, they ditched any negative modifiers to ability scores, didn't they? Mm.
And they did that separately. They actually did that in an errata a couple of months back.
Yeah, and errata is a great place to fix little things, but that's a major change.
Yeah.
That's something they should probably have included as, by the way, if no one told you before now, we've done away with that stuff, although it's baked into a lot of the other rules. Ability score increases being put where you're like, I'm going to play a swole as anything elf, and it's going to be amazing. Mm. A real beach body gym bunny elf. It'll be a lot of fun. Which is kind of like, I'm down for that. I think the tropes that have kind of codified and crystallized around races in the fiction from which D&D draws inspiration are narrative tropes that were there for reasons that are lost in the early decades of the last century. They served their purpose, but we're telling much more nuanced stories now. And they're stories that have to come from a place where... So, this drills really deep. But when we talk about D&D, we shouldn't talk about races. We're talking about species, more or less. Like, race is such a loaded term, and the concept of race is such a nebulous construct. Sure, I've turned half of our listeners off. They'll be angrily scratching their keyboards. But, like, it's not... like, species have races or have ethnogenetic identifiers. Like, species is a D&D species, magical species, crossbreeding, it gets very fuzzy, but...
Best if you don't look into it too much.
Yeah, I know. We should really try and kind of reshape our language, and if we reshape our language and reshape the way we apply our numbers, we're going to be playing a game that is much more reflective of the sort of things we want to play games about today. Now, I think you should generally, in a high fantasy game, have an evil other. But it should probably not be a player character race, and the confusion and consternation that has arisen over orcs and what oppressed race in the real world they might represent has had acres of ink spilled over it. But no, I'm generally, to answer your actual question, I'm generally in favour, but it's a bit. It's all a bit sort of light. I think, yeah, putting ability score.
It is light. I've seen people welcome it, but point out that it could go a lot further. Because what it generally does is it point like, hey, an elf will have your +2 int, but maybe your elf was raised in a different culture, and as such they may speak a different language, they may be proficient in different tools or weapons because they did not come from the same society as most elves.
Right, yeah.
Which for some won't scratch the itch of, so all elves from the elf society are like that, but you're the one who's different. But it shows a willingness to change, and it shows a design approach that's about letting players be flexible with the character they want to build. It actually throws in, it's almost like a footnote in the character origin. It throws in a little template that just quickly create your own origin, and it's just like, describe what they're humanoid, you get 30 feet of movement, pick a feat, pick an attribute increase, pick a language, pick a skill, you're done. And I'm like, just in a little grey box, they've just given players the space to really freely define any species or race or origin they like. And I'm like, well, that's probably something we should have had from the start. But it's very nice to see.
Yeah, and look, the order of Knights of the Seesaw, those for whom balance is king, are going to get sort of bent out of shape over some of this stuff. But honestly, and I do suspect that this kind of pushes D&D more towards some sort of points buy.
Yes.
That goes beyond just attributes. We'll see.
It's the whole way through, the entire way through the character options section. I just see, I see two things. I see just a drive towards flexibility, to allow players to play the character they want at any moment. So it's got notes in it about how, hey, if you noticed one of your skills is you never use it, maybe next time you get an attribute increase, ask your DM to swap your skills out. Maybe next time you get a subclass ability, ask your DM to swap out your subclass and give some guidelines as to how to come up with a narrative reason for why your Storm Sorcerer is suddenly a Dragon Sorcerer. Maybe you went on a quest and drank some dragon blood, who knows? Figure it out. A lot of the new class features are abilities to change your cantrip every day, ability to change your fighting style when you level up, just more fighting style, more maneuvers, more flexibility and variation to allow players to just really, if you know, later in the game, codifying, changing and rebuilding elements of their character within reason, within scope.
I think it acts perhaps as a good way to reintroduce the sort of character building, character polishing element that's been lost in the game in 5th Ed. Because, like, people have made the accusation that 5th Ed's nice, simple subclass system sort of takes an awful lot of the customization that some people expect from a game like D&D. But if this is this is a system that encourages rebuilds and tweaks every level, that might scratch the itch for a few people. Although
I think it might have some DMs scratching their eyes out, but I do agree that the flexibility isn't just a character creation. It's as been pointed out, it's kind of there in the game, in the interim space between sessions when leveling happens, and it's now become a little easier to it's now become canon that you can do that stuff without having a lot of grumbling from other people at the table. Oh, well, if he gets to change this, can I get to do this?
I feel like that's something a lot of tables would have been doing anyway. It's just like, you didn't realize when you leveled that this subclass wasn't quite what you're looking for.
Yeah.
You found a new one in another book. Just switch over to that. We'll just assume that your paladinism was accidentally getting its wires crossed or something, and your oath has been fixed now.
I feel like putting it in ink does a lot to soothe the minds of inexperienced dungeon masters.
Yes.
Now, not a lot of ink, and this is a criticism I'll return to for this book again and again. The change your subclass section is two-thirds of a page, maybe. It's not a lot of it. It's kind of like, here's a good idea, why don't you? And then there's a couple of examples, and then you're left to figure out the rest yourself. But we should probably press on. I assume we're not going to do.
Oh, we're not going to get into everything. I just kind of want to touch on that trend. The other two major trends I noticed throughout all of the subclasses that have been added in and all that everything is I've already mentioned the added flexibility it's added. One of the two things I noticed in is it's just expanding abilities. There's like one of the optional bard abilities. It makes your inspiration a little bit more powerful. It now affects spells. One of the druid optional abilities, their wild shape can now summon a familiar. One of the monk option abilities, they can now make most weapons into monk weapons. It's adding a little bit, it's just extending the existing abilities and just adding a little bit more to them, like an extra qualifier to give them a little bit more. There's a bunch more fighting styles and maneuvers in there as well, so it's again just extending the original classes. Even at least one of the new classes in there, the Bard College of Eloquence, the entire design of that seems to be just around getting more mileage out of bardic inspiration. The other thing I've seen in it, and this is most apparent when you're reading through the Artificer, particularly around the Artificer, Artillerist, and Battlesmith, is I feel like they're a lot less prescriptive in their definitions of how features work and what they're like now. Particularly when you read through the Artillerist, the Artillerist is an artificer who fights with a firearm, some kind of cannon. What does that look like? You decide. How big is it? You decide. Does it have legs and can it walk around? Maybe you could hold it in your hand. Does it look like a gun? Does it look like a dog who barks fire? It outlines a couple of it outlines the like what abilities it has, and then just leaves all of that up to you to really let this one class feature cover a broad array of characters, from a gunslinger to a weird mechanic who's got a mechanical bird on his head that tweets out healing spells. And to just try and let and just with a bit of with some minimal ruling and some big concepts, just cover a wide base of character concepts. And I guess in that way, maybe not try and make people feel they need a single subclass for every potential character idea.
Yeah, it's nice and flexible. And yeah, the Artificer sort of being followed around by this kind of gun dog throws back to what was the strongest build in 3.5 for the original Artificer, which was basically to ignore all this infusion stuff and tool up your golem or your homunculus. So that's kind of carried forward into this era without it being, because it was literally the only solid sound way to play the Artificer that didn't kind of fall behind the curve. But it is so much, as a class, it has a lot more interesting options now. So, and I kind of they can't help but look sideways at Pathfinder 2 and the kind of the Goblin Bombsmith stuff for some of their ideas that like they're definitely keeping abreast with the Artificer.
Even just in the Artificer, just with the whole list of infusions, it feels like the Artificer alone, one of the big criticisms people always made about D&D classes, Artificer alone I feel has more choice and more options than almost the entire rest of the class list combined. And that sort of that broad flexibility that they're given, like ample design space to play with in the way they've written that. It's interesting.
In this book, yes, but I did a bit of a thought. There's about 115 published subclasses now, of which I think there might be 20 odd coming from this book. But the cleric tops the poll at about 14 subclasses. So the Artificer still has a way to go to catch up.
I feel like choosing your cleric domain doesn't really give you a lot of difference in one cleric and next, but other people might disagree.
In that case, I'd say yes, there's definitely a lot to be learned from the Artificers written. Maybe we don't need as many subclasses for each class. They should have a lot more flavour. Okay.
There's arguments to be made either way in that kind of thing. Was that some people are more than happy to go off and be creative and come up with their own personal concept. Others might argue that it might weaken a setting to have like nothing be set in stone, and it's like, no one comes from the same wizard school. Everyone is this weird, crazy, eccentric, which doesn't fit every setting. But Fifth Ed has, for all of the new settings it's created, it hasn't really insisted on any one style for anything. So it's perfectly in keeping with the Fifth Ed aesthetic to give people flexibility rather than sort of demand a thing. But that is very much something that I think DMs and players need to negotiate. But it is good to see that they're erring on the side of permission rather than forgivenesses. Two things real quick on aesthetic. I feel like generally the design sense in this book, particularly among subclasses, there's a lot more to sometimes fellow host Shane has thrown power fantasy out when describing D&D, and yeah, definitely a lot of the stuff in this feels like it's lifted right out of comic books. We've already talked about Iron Man blasting through in the Artificer description. Some of the abilities seem a lot more cartoony. Some of them feel a lot more anime inspired. There's
the monk, yeah.
Yeah, the monk definitely.
Anything in the warlock tree at all.
Ranger Swarm Keeper, I've seen in various animes. The other thing is, and it's this is something, again, I feel like it might be addressing people's complaints, and this is kind of something that's come up before. The summon spells in the player's handbook is something that really got in some people's ire, I think. If you quickly go over them, the original summon spells in the player's handbook, the player would ask for a number of creatures to come, and the dungeon master would flip through their book and decide what creatures actually showed up. So a player might be rubbing their hands together with glee, hoping for some friendly wolves to come and help them out, and then they end up with maybe a couple of parrots or badgers or something other than what they were hoping for. It was very sort of unreliable and random, but potentially very interesting, depending on the DM. Xanatars addressed this to an extent. There were some summon spells in Xanatars, but they all had sort of, or a lot of them had, they still weren't fully reliable. I'm thinking of like Summon Lesser Demon, where you can summon a demon to help you, but if you lose concentration, that demon doesn't go away, they just stop helping you. So again, there's a little bit unreliable. There's a new set of summon spells introduced here in Tasha's that I feel they're completely reliable spells. Each one just gives you a template and says this monster shows up, and they do exactly what you say. And maybe not as powerful as some of the ones in Xanatars, not as many as you would have got in the player's handbook, but for players who complained they did not have reliable summon spells, here you've got a swathe of reliable summon spells in this book that give you the exact stat sheet that gets summoned to help you. You say it, you get it, and there you go. You get one monster, and they'll help you out to the best of their ability. Which feels like again addressing some complaints that some players definitely had.
Thanks, I hate it.
Yeah, I know. I'm not that keen on it, but I find it interesting that it's in here.
Yes, they're kind of, I guess, almost making that summon stuff becomes something of a class feature. You're expected to add more bodies to the battlefield if you're playing those classes.
Yeah.
Through the summon spells, and it's kind of now becomes, well, what flavor would you like?
Yeah. Of course, the less reliable, potentially more interesting summon spells are still there. A player can still go and use them if they want. I can definitely see a couple of players on my table rubbing their hands together with glee at the idea of their demon getting off the chain and causing chaos in a fight, as opposed to a less powerful fiend obeying the rules and doing exactly what they're told.
Right, and I know we're not diving in, but blade singing, I won't say anything about it, but look at that artwork. They're
That's
like
great.
a Disney power couple.
Oh yeah.
There's a drow and a high elf blade singer, and straight from Disney casting, and they're kind of awesome. And they also feature some of those magical tattoos that are buried there later in the book, kind of bringing some of that Eberron flavoured magic into the setting.
Magical tattoos are a lot of fun. The art in general is good throughout. I love there is in the sidekicks. There's lots of art of potential sidekicks. There is one of the warriors is a cook with a big skillet, and it's great. Yes, fight enemies with your cast iron skillet. I love it.
Okay, well, I guess we're moving past chapter 1 then. We'll skip over feats because they're feats.
They're optional rules.
Some of them are good.
And optional rules in a book of optional rules. So.
Yeah, and lots of or +1 attribute feats in there, which I think is a nice way of squaring the circle of, well, I'm giving up the attribute bump to get an interesting effect.
There's some interesting looking ones, but we're going to skip over them.
Chapter 2 opens a great group Patrons, which is another lift from Eberron. It is another lift from Eberron.
They have expanded it here, given more ideas, but really this whole section is inspiration for campaigns and quests. If you ever thought about starting an adventuring party where you're all soldiers, well, there's a whole big chunk of writing of ideas in here to fuel your campaign, or guild members, or what have you, and little boons you can get because you're working for a lich, or the kind of person who might come help you out because you're working for an academy.
Yeah, and they've got branches all over. They've got sort of assistant teachers all over the place. They give you a safe house, or they'll give you the next clue, or I just happen to have a map of that dungeon. This is Tasha's at its absolute best. All of this section is useful. It's inspirational, as you say, and there's enough of all of it. Every single academy, ancient being, these are the type of patrons, aristocrat, criminal syndicate, they all have a bunch of types, a bunch of examples. Here's a bunch of contacts, members, quests, retainers, like all of these things that are detailed enough that you've got a solid grasp at the flick of a page, or click of a link. And there's still, your imagination will run wild having been fed on this stuff, as opposed to, here's a good idea, you figure it out, which happens elsewhere in the book.
Yeah.
So I really like this section.
It's really good. If you look at the chapters, it doesn't look like much, but it's really, I say that's the most value in the book, particularly for DMs who are creating their own things from scratch, or for players who are looking for ideas about, why they're getting together as a party. Even it's good stuff.
Mm. And it's a section with tons of good artwork as well.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
So it's really interesting scenes.
It was one of my favourite sections of the Airborne book, and I'm glad to see it again. Well, I will see it that's one of the things about this book is, it might be something that's like a whole bunch of reprints, but it still feels like it's going to be basically mandatory for major 5e players to get, just because there's so much stuff in it.
Well, I mean, I wouldn't expect all players to want to pick up an Eberron source book, particularly if you have no interest in Eberron, but to get some of the same good content from that Eberron source book in here is good. I mean, there was a great section in the Mythic Odysseys of Teros book about serving your god and all sorts of different ideas and boons about that I felt filled a similar niche. I would have liked to have seen that here. It's not. Maybe the next one.
I think we're in agreement. The group patron stuff is just good, solid DM material. Chapter 3, magic bits and pieces. And part of most of these books I dread, or at least back in the day, because it's endless splat books filled with endless lists of magic items and spells. It's quite constrained here. I mean, there's plenty of that stuff sloshing around already. I think they do a fairly good job of keeping it under control.
So a lot of new magic items are tattoos, and a lot of those tattoos are really just older magic items in a new form, which helps, I guess, constrain it a bit. But the fact that they're tattoos gives them a very different feel and work different mechanically. A lot of the spells are actually reprints from random minor books that people might not have picked up, particularly if you weren't into Magic the Gathering or you didn't really want that Sword Coast splat book. They're all back here. There's also a little note I quite liked, and again, it just feels like, again, more codifying things that were probably fine. Just encouraging you to, like, personalize the look and feel of your spells, not necessarily the effects. Your fireball will still burn with fire, but maybe it might look different to what I was describing in the book. Maybe your magic missiles, one example it gives, or maybe your magic missiles, because you're a farmer, are just a bunch of spectral chickens who will chase the enemy around.
The Zelda spell.
Yeah, absolutely. But again, it just feels like a small little bit of note. It's like, hey, wouldn't this be a good idea? And it's just like putting that idea out there and also just putting it in writing. So less experienced DM would feel more encouraged to go, yeah, sure, let's do it. Magic chickens. I love it.
There's some big interesting magic items in this book. And all of, like, skimming, I think what stands out for me is that some of these are just their own thing. They're like the layout for them is entirely different from any other magic item in the book, and they deserve attention. There's no throwaway kind of, here's a couple of bonuses, here's a couple of pluses, or here's X amount of dice of damage when you use this. It's really solid. The tattoo stuff is really interesting because of integrating into your character, but magic items you can put in your bag and pull out and use whenever. Like, some of these you could base entire adventures around. Yeah,
absolutely. And they all have, like, multiple effects and maybe bad effects and like several uses. And not all of the uses combat uses. So it's really, really things to fuel imagination of the players when they get them. And just so, and like I said, some of them just begging to be the center point of a quest or the launching point of an adventure.
And I think what this helps to solidify for me is, first of all, a lot of them require attunement, and second of all, because they're some of them are what could only be described as convoluted. You have to really, like, there's lots of rules around using them, like the One Ring. You know, you've got to be careful when you put the One Ring on, because these things happen and these other things happen, and it's good and it's bad. It justifies not giving your players a lot of magic items, because each one that they have requires them to really get to know it and learn how to use it effectively. There's depth to magic items in this book that I don't really recall seeing before, and I'm quite pleased to see it here.
Yeah, there's maybe a few in the Dungeon Master's in Dungeon Master's Guide with a similar level of depth, but there's not so many. The ones here are a lot of them are far more interesting than the lion's share of what you get in your basic book.
Okay, well, we should probably whiz on because we're stretching our allotted time.
Keep these wheels spinning.
This is the curate's egg for me. The chapter 4 is the Dungeon Master's Tools.
Final section.
And good stuff, bad stuff, and some stuff I'm like, how did this get in here? And why isn't this... I shouldn't criticize other books for not having it, but some of this stuff should probably be elevated to DMG level in future editions of the game.
I imagine it will be in future editions.
Do you want to pick out anything in particular?
So I'm going to leave session 0 to you. I think. I'll mention it briefly. Session 0 is a deeply important part of any good, healthy campaign, and there's been much written about it online. But seeing it described in a book, again, to people who maybe aren't reading as much online, this could be their first encounter with it. And a lot of what it outlines is stuff that's in the DMG, but to sort of gather all those thoughts together and encourage a player and a new DM to bring them to the table, to have discussions about what the campaign is going to be, where it's going to go. It's good to see.
Yeah. Who knew I was the sensitive one in this in this podcast? I think it's the thought around Session 0 and all of the stuff that's wrapped up in it. And I mean, we go into social contracts and veils and flags and safe spaces, things like that. There is, like, if you get right down into someone's imagination, you can scare the pants off them. You can really do some damage if you're any damn good at being a GM. And you know what? On occasion, I think I've been damn good at being a GM, which comes with great responsibility. And these are your friends. These are the people that at least at some level you care about. They might even be your families. Be careful. They know where you sleep. Session 0, any language, any sort of discussion around Session 0, I think, is very important in this kind of book. And as I said, I think this is the sort of stuff that you should give over pages to in the next edition of the Dungeon Master's Guide. And there's the only other sections in the Dungeon Master's Tools that say are almost as important would be just to skip ahead a few things, are probably the supernatural regions and the magical phenomena, which I'm glad to see this stuff here, because I think it's an overlooked element of making good sort of encounters and making good campaigns, and it's great to see some thought there.
Very inspirational as well. There's like pages and pages of real good descriptions and ideas about what might happen in a particularly unusual environment. And
all with good art. All with art you can go, look, that sort of thing is happening.
Yeah.
Or it's this kind of place, which is really nice. Not so much, and magical phenomena is, yeah, like
I quite liked the magical phenomena. I like some of those descriptions of different magical storms.
I want to use some of these as they're written, which I think is great. And I also know that I want to do something different, and I think I can write it up in the same format now. Can't say the same about natural hazards, which is a bit of a C previous.
It is. It's an extension of a bit in the DMG, points you back to the DMG, and it gives you a couple more examples, and then just kind of says, you know what, there's actually a lot of spells that simulate natural hazards, so maybe have at those instead. Which is, it's fine. And in kind of one way encourages DMs to be creative, but it would have been nice to see some more.
Well, in the prep for the show, we were talking about, people who would say, I don't need this book because I have my AD&D books on this stuff from, this book isn't for them. This stuff is to be presented to people who maybe this is the first time they're seeing this stuff in print. But if this is the first time they're seeing it in print, I think they deserve better than maybe use some spells that look like a fog or look like a thunderstorm. Like I've got the AD&D second ed book on navigating I can't remember what the book's called, but natural hazards.
Was it Wilderness Survival Guide?
Yes, it is. The Wilderness Survival Guide. And it's an entire book of great ideas. You don't need to use the system. You've just got to read it and go, right, I know what to do now. This gets a page and a half a page, and then a spell list of C previous.
I just want to quickly call out two more things. Sidekicks, which have previously made an appearance in the Essentials kit, they're back here. They're great. It even suggests here that if a player finds playing a full player class too complicated, let them play a sidekick class instead. And you know what? That's fine. Maybe some people want an easier ride.
Some people want to play dogs.
Yeah, some people want to play dogs. It also encourages you statting up a dog as a warrior, which is, good.
I love that they're not all presented as sort of dour men-at-arms either.
No, they're not.
They're all these kind of kooky...
Yeah.
They're almost like the Orko to He-Man.
Yeah. They're a very... It's a very eclectic bunch, the example Sidekicks it throws up, so it really gets the imagination stirred. And real quick, parleying with monsters, which isn't really what it sounds like. It's two things. First, it suggests, hey, maybe sapient creatures will not immediately attack players on sight, and points you to the section in the DMG on social interactions, which is something that's worth a read anyway. It also has a nice little extra addendum to it, which is how to find out what a monster wants, and suggests what skills you might roll, and then has a few sample tables that for what different kinds of monsters might be looking for. Does a beast want some nice meats to eat? Does a humanoid want information on their enemies? Does a celestial want to hear about a heroic deed? That sort of stuff.
Don't know how you're ever meant to discern what an ooze wants, but they're in here. So,
yeah, absolutely.
So this falls very squarely in the halfway house for me. It's certainly got me thinking about how I might do it in future.
Yeah,
but the tables are nice, but they're just nice.
Yeah.
Maybe could do a little more. Okay, it's
the bare minimum.
Let's put in the hub. Oh no. Well, do you know what? It's competent. Which is not what I'll say about the final section. So let's we put the boots in.
Yeah,
puzzles section.
Go on.
this for me at least held great promise. And then I looked at it. It's like, oh no.
So I understand why they would put in a section about puzzles and encouraging players to use puzzles in their game, and even given some advice on if players get stumped, what kind of maybe make them get a roll to get an in-character hint as to solution. But other than that, I wasn't a big fan of this section.
The general advice in it is fine. The specific examples, like they poured a fair bit of work into giving, like they've got a list of about a dozen puzzles.
I haven't read them all, but I read a few of them, and
I ran into some problems really quickly. In fact, I'll just describe one, and I have to describe it because they don't give you any bloody artwork for it. And it's a puzzle called Creature Paintings, and it features 7 paintings. And I thought, okay, 7 paintings, great. Oh, there's a kind of a puzzle there. It seems a bit odd. I'll take a look at the artwork in the handouts. Roll down to the handouts. And are there 7 paintings? Are there my eye? There's none.
There's one painting. It's actually
there's
above,
one painting.
It's above the section. Yeah, there's a painting of some dragons.
Oh, that's in the puzzle itself. None of the handouts. So you don't get the paintings that the character's meant to scrutinize to work out this, was the phrase you used, moon logic? This moon logic puzzle to do with the names of things that appear in the paintings. It's just like, and I believe this is listed as easy. So whoever ascribed the difficulties is probably the person who wrote the challenge rating system. So complete dingbat. I read this puzzle and I just thought, how am I, okay, if I could show the players these paintings, there's a hope, but it's a faint hope. If I have to sit here and go, there's a 7 puzzle, now wait while I describe 7 paintings to you, while the barbarian is trying to pry up the floorboards. I'm like, this isn't going to work this time. This is my biggest criticism of this section. Most of these appear to have been written with no real attention to how a party solving puzzles actually works at a table, because crowbars are going to be involved very quickly. And none of these seem to take account of any of that. It's like, oh, well, it can't, these locks can't be picked, so that's not good enough.
At the very least, some of them might give you some inspiration, but there are better puzzles. If you want examples of puzzles, there's better puzzles than any of the printed campaign books for 5th Ed or that Paizo has put out over the last 20 years. There's some ideas, some inspirations. The puzzles as written, I'm not a fan of them. They're like I said, the logic behind some of them. Me reading the entire puzzle end to end is just sitting here going, I don't see how a player is ever going to solve this.
And so many of them rely on they're going to be number or letter puzzles. And really, I think at a table, what you want are puzzles in time and motion. The water is rising. The cubes are glowing. The different coloured statues of gruesome beasties seem to correspond to tiles on the wall. Something like that you can put in front of players. And some of the artwork is, like all of the puzzle artwork is functional. It smacks of vector-based graphics program stuff. And I don't really...
There's a few little paintings, but the handouts are more... stayed.
Yeah, actually, so the Haunted Hallway, is it the Haunted Hallway? No, it could be one of the other ones. Has a great illustration of what the puzzle would look like if you found it in a dungeon. But what your player's going to see is a word search grid. It's like, this isn't really evoking.
That is Reckless Steps.
Reckless Steps, yeah. This isn't really evoking for my players. Like, it's the difference between a sort of a word search grid and seeing it stretched out in front of you. I don't think these puzzles work terribly well. And it's a pity because they've put an enormous amount of work into presenting a good selection, but they all tend to hit this same sort of, this could appear in the back of a newspaper kind of thing.
I feel like it might be because they are absent of context. It might just be that the addition of a story and a specific setting would have driven their writers to more could more better puzzles, just with that added bit of inspiration, as opposed to these sort of standalone conceptual ideas of a puzzle.
Yeah. I think a lot more I could say about it, especially in terms of running. I don't know if there's any sort of, okay, the handouts are fine, but I've run puzzle encounters on Roll20 for players, and they've been slightly convoluted. I'm quite proud of them, but they're taking a lot of time, and they've guess what? You're not smarter than 4 people. They will blast through your puzzles. But it is. You can engage people at something other than the word search. And I think time and motion puzzles or environmental puzzles have their place, and it would have been great to see a section that detailed good uses of kind of Indiana Jones style puzzles, but not a lot of them sort of get a hint here.
Oh, yeah, water up to their waist, and they're running out of oxygen. That's the kind of puzzle that goes over well, I find.
Yeah, because the solutions are like, I better solve this, otherwise I don't get to breathe anymore.
Yeah.
Not, oh no, I might get the word wrong or the order of the numbers wrong. What will I do then? Right, okay, we've thrown compliments, we've thrown brickbats. What are we going to say about Tasha's Cauldron of Everything?
I like it.
As a purchase.
Overall, I like it. It's not must have. Absolutely, and particularly in the way I think there's a lot of great inspiration here, and I think the design sense, the design thinking around all of the added flexibility, top to bottom, every class, every the whole ethos of let the player play the character they want to play within reason. Like, you can make your choice at level up, you can make your choice at to talk to your DM, make it work narratively. I think it's all great. I'm not sure it's a must buy, but if for the DM who's run a lot of 5th Ed and wants to run a lot more, for the players who've played a lot of characters and plan to play a lot more, I think it's a must buy for those people.
Yeah, I would have been ready to throw this to the side, except for the fact that it does so much good work to rehabilitate existing classes, and is really generous, and then adds some subclasses on top of that. Some of the new subclasses are really interesting. The reprint issue is one that if you have been religiously picking up all of the stuff that has come before this and have, you follow Unearthed Arcana and you pay attention to the errata and you're on D&D Beyond every day, then you're going to feel like you've overpaid for some of this stuff because you've paid for it twice, essentially. But like sort of a compilation, it's a almanac. It's gathering up a lot of useful stuff that it is genuinely good to have finally in its proper form and there for you to use. It's a very coherent book. On the DM side, good and bad. I think they gave too much space to certain things that were undercooked. I think they have some, here's a good idea, you figure it out, stuff that is irritating just because the ideas are really good, but some of the sections are really strong. I really like the Sidekicks. I really like the regions and magical phenomena stuff.
Yeah, Psychic and Patrons, both reprints, but they're both excellent sections that a lot of people might have missed in the past because they were not in books that everybody would have bought.
Apart from the magic tattoos, are the magic items reprints for the most part? Or
no, magic items are all new, I believe.
Like, this is strong stuff. These are full meals in and of themselves. Almost any of the... If it goes over a kind of a half-page or page and there's more than one chart, this is an interesting magic item. Start thinking about how you use this.
I'm a big fan of the Baba Yaga's Mortar and Pestle. Great way to travel.
This sits alongside Xanathar's Guide.
Yes.
In a really interesting way. It does less in some respects and does more in others. To its credit, it doesn't have a tying knots section.
No.
I don't know what was going through anyone's mind.
Sometimes you need to fill a page, man. Sometimes you need to fill a page.
It's a really strong addition to the rule set, and I think it should put some criticisms about some of the classes to bed, and it gives lots of flexibility. Like this, if there aren't... There's food for the optimization thread here, I believe. because there's now genuinely interesting choices within each class. Like playing a Gloom... Was it a Gloom Warden?
Gloomstalker?
Gloomstalker
in the previous book.
versus playing a Swarm Keeper. Like, these are two subclasses that are really covering different bases and are really interesting.
It also goes a long way to avoiding lock-in. You can make substantial changes to your class, like retroactively, several levels after the fact, and the fact that it adds in a lot of little abilities, like a lot of the fighting styles are specifically enabling concepts that people I've heard people personally say to me that their character concept does not work in D&D, and just a little fighting style thrown in there, thrown weapon fighting, suddenly everyone's knife throwing dreams come true.
I swapped out 2 weapon fighting for thrown weapon as soon as this book came out. It was like, this is actually going to make my double axe dwarf ranger work. So I can't wait to see if it actually works. But yes, it's there. It's real. The dream is alive, folks. Let me ask you a question. So this Tight 30 episode has been a pleasant hour spent in bubbling away in Tasha's Cauldron of everything. We've talked an awful lot, but one of the coven has remained silent. Is there anything you'd like to say now that we've thoroughly spoiled the book for you, Scarr?
No, you certainly made it sound interesting. I sort of expected going in that there were going to be sections that I wasn't really going to be interested in, and there's going to be sections that were a little unbaked. I thought it was much like that as well, So it sounds fine, and I probably will still pick up a copy. I do find, now this is something, this is again me, but there's something I've been theorizing since I heard this Tasha's was going to have all this altering content, this all, retraining rules, change your race rules, and such. And it's actually, the more I've heard about it, the more I've confirmed it. Particularly, like, the idea of there's a whole new set of summoning spells that are more tightly focused and more better explained and thing.
The word you're looking for is boring. But yes, go on.
That all speaks to me, and maybe this is just me as a third ed veteran who's seen a couple of editions and the kinds of books that come out around an edition change. This looks to me like a thumbtack full stop book. This is not the end of a 5th ed by any means, but this is a sort of a signpost saying, at this point, I think somewhere in a back room in WotC, someone has penciled in 6E question mark on a cue card and put up on top of a wall. I think this is heralding an edition change. Maybe not a full edition change. Maybe it'll be a 5.5 rather than a 6th ed. But I think this is sort of drawing the line under. And to be fair, like, it's been 6 years straight?
Yeah.
For an edition?
2014, late 2014, we launched into 5th edition. And 3 years we got our Xanatars, and now 3 years for this second Tasha's Cauldron of Everything. So
yeah, I highly suspect that we are going to very soon start hearing rumors that a 5.5 or 6th ed is in the works.
I agree that they're probably drawing a line under the rules. I think a couple of years from now we're going to be looking at Drizzt's summary of subclasses as the top 200. Because you can probably keep publishing those to great acclaim. I have misgivings, but anyways, this book does feel like it's perhaps, as Sean, you said, there's signposts, there's definitely indications of where 6th ed might go. Okay, look, we genuinely we've topped an hour now, so we should probably
we got to wrap it in.
Sean, will you take us out?
Sure, yeah. I hope you've all enjoyed us rambling on about this book. You already knew my thoughts on 5th ed, so you know I was going to be somewhat positive. But until the next book of everything comes out, this party is over.
Thanks for listening to The Adventuring Party. You can find show notes and links to things we've mentioned at www.theadventuringparty.net and on our Facebook page. You can leave comments there, or talk to our Twitter account at AdventuringPTY, or you can record a voice message at www.speakpipe.com/theadventuringparty. We can also be contacted directly by email at party@theadventuringparty.net. If you'd like to be in touch with the party all the time, come join our Discord server, link in the show notes. The Adventuring Party is released under a Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial Share Alike version 3 license.